Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you to my history reaction channel. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be taking a look at why we fight the Battle of Russia. This is a video produced by the Department of Defense back during World War II as part of a propaganda series to show why we are fighting in this war, who our allies are and what they're doing, who our enemies are, and why we should all be involved in this, and why we should be supporting our allies. There are multiple videos in this series. This one here is the Battle of Russia. It is about an hour and 23 minutes long, roughly. We're not going to be watching the whole thing today by any means. We're just going to be watching two small parts of it. As you can see on the screen, the history of Russia. And then right after that, I know that they go into the geography and the demography of Russia. So we'll take a look at that as well. But if you guys like what you see here, if you'd like to explore more, I'd be more than happy to watch more of this video or any of the other videos in the series. I know they have one on the Battle of Britain, they have one on the Battle of China, which I really do kind of want to get into the Battle of China one at some point. I've never seen any of these except I've seen one small section of this video, the section on the Siege of Leningrad. That's how I became aware of this series. I was doing a term paper on the logistics of getting food and supplies into Leningrad, and this video has some footage of showing and recreating in some cases, or in some cases showing actual images of what was going on there. And I wanted to look at that just to kind of get my head into the spirit of things, if you will. So I've seen that portion. That's the only portion I've seen. I saw a video that was just cut out of this, specifically devoted to that. But I always wanted to get back and look at the rest of this. So I looked at the content and I decided we would tackle the history, geography, and demography of Russia for this video. Because this is propaganda, I want you guys to help me cut through all the exaggerations, because there are going to be a lot of them, I'm sure, and overcome some of the lies of omission, because I guarantee there's going to be some of those too. For example, we're going to be talking about Russia, and this is going to be the United States supporting our alliance with Russia. So they're probably going to show all the good stuff that Russia's done over history, and they're going to leave out anything that might turn us against them, portray them in a negative manner. So I want you guys to help me catch all this, because there's going to be a lot of it. I will point out a lot. I'm hoping some of you will go down in the comments and say, hey, did you catch this? Or just so you know, this isn't true, or this is exaggerated, or they left out this little detail that actually makes all the difference in the world. Look for glittering generalities, look for lies of omission, look for all the stuff you would normally expect with propaganda. With that said, I will include a link to the original video down in the description below. We're going to be watching from the 3-minute mark to about the 15-minute mark or so. I'm not sure how far in it goes before we'll stop. But I expect this will be, the base video that we'll be watching will be about 12 to 15 minutes. I expect I'll be adding a lot to this. Because it is propaganda, I intend to be tearing into it pretty hard. And I also expect I'll be adding some random trivia, because that's just one thing I like to do. But enough rambling, let's just get into this, and let's have some fun with it. This is not going to be serious history because it is propaganda. But propaganda, understanding propaganda, this film itself is history. Let's understand the world that this film was made in.
A battle that fills the pages of Russian history. Well,
okay, I can already see where this one's going. The invasion of the German Knights in 1242. This is going to be the battle on the ice. And I can already see the propaganda at work. For starters, this is the history of Russia. But we're not really talking about Russia, are we? We're talking about the Soviet Union. They're our ally. Russia's not our ally. The Soviet Union is. So why are they portraying this as a battle of Russia? Why are they portraying this as a history of Russia? But I guarantee you, they're going to incorporate Ukraine, Belarus, and all those other countries in this. You could argue that they're doing it for convenience because a lot of us tend to conflate Russia and the Soviet Union, to use those words interchangeably, but I don't think it's that simple. I think they're deliberately using the term Russia as much as they can to distance themselves from supporting the communist Soviet Union. because that does have a negative connotation with Americans. We've already had one Red Scare by this time, and I think this is a deliberate ploy on the part of the government to use the term Russia as much as possible to avoid talking about the Soviet Union, because they don't want to appear that we're here to support the Soviet Union. Russia is a little less controversial than the Soviet Union. At least it has different connotations. So anyway, back to this. I think it's telling that they say the invasion of the German Knights for a couple reasons, actually. But the main one is, I think this is deliberate again, in order to highlight that in 1240, the Germans have been invading Russia all the way back in 1242. See, this is a constant problem. The poor Russians are just always on the receiving end of German aggression. I think that's where they're going with this. I know they're going to hit an invasion in World War I. I'm sure they're going to hit the Swedish invasion, and they're going to kind of probably try to pass that out. I think they're going to really highlight invasions from the West to get this idea that and they're going to really emphasize any Germanic components. So we're talking about the German Knights. What they're really talking about, sort of, is the Teutonic Knights. And that's a term you're going to hear all the time when we're talking about the battle on the ice, the Battle of Lake Peipus, or as the Russians would call it, the Battle of Lake Chud, because that was the Russian name for the lake. But there's a lot of nuance to that. Yes, they were German knights mostly. No one knows exactly how many were involved in this. I've heard estimates of 200 to 300 typically is where I think most historians nowadays are landing. The original sources, there's only really two good primary sources written by people who were right at the battle, one on each side, and both use numbers that we are pretty sure are exaggerated. So we have to kind of take the numbers with a grain of salt. I've seen figures up to 10,000 totally on the German side. That's almost certainly a great exaggeration. And we're not even talking about the bulk of this force is not German. The bulk of this force is what we would now call Estonians. There's around 2,000 or so Estonian infantrymen supported by what I've generally heard is 200 to 300 knights, most of which were German, but I believe there were also some Danish knights involved as well. And when we're talking about the Teutonic Knights specifically, which is the term you'll most often hear about this, we're really that's correct, but it's also misleading. So let's go into the Teutonic Knights briefly. I'll try to keep this as simple as possible, but I think that'll be fun to talk about. So the Teutonic Knights originate in the Third Crusade. You have the Kingdom of Germany, Frederick Barbarossa. I believe he was also the Holy Roman Emperor at the time. I could be wrong on that. I really don't remember for sure. But he was for sure considered the king of the Germans. Germany as a state like we know it now didn't exist. There were a lot of little Germanic states within the Holy Roman Empire, and there was a kingdom of Germany that incorporated some of those. But a lot of the areas that we now associate with Germany were not necessarily part of that, and Prussia being a prime example of that. But Barbarossa leads some Germans to the Holy Land as part of the Third Crusade. Barbarossa dies along the way. Some of his force continues on. They arrive and participate in the siege of Acre. Now, there's not a lot. This is really the first major German force there, and they don't have much of a support network there. So they petition the Pope, and they form a new knightly order along the same model as the Knights Templar or the Hospitallers. Now, these new knights it's got a really long, complicated name. It's something like the Order of the Germans of the House of Mary in Jerusalem, or something really close to that. But it's more commonly known as the Teutonic Knights. So they originally set up in Acre. They are primarily a support network. They provide hospitalization, medical treatment. They provide support for the Germans fighting in the Crusades. They do directly participate as well. Later, the Pope gives them permission to become a more militant order, and they begin working their way north from Acre. So they end up fighting in Hungary. helping Christendom there. They get into Transylvania, they get into Poland, and they have various military engagements there, typically supporting one side or the other in various battles. Eventually, they end up in part of what we now think of as Prussia. I'm pretty sure that's where they ended up anyway. And there, the Pope gives them some land, and they form a region of their own that is controlled by the Teutonic Knights. So that's the origin of the Teutonic Knights. Why am I spending time on this? Because there's also another knightly order that's also forming right next door to where the Teutonic Knights are now setting up shop. This is the Livonian, the sword brothers of the Livonian order. Actually, they were called the Livonian Sword Brothers or the Brothers of the Sword, and later they'll become known as the Livonian Order. They have a lot of names, but more commonly we'll think of them as the Livonian Order. But earlier, they were often called the Brothers of the Sword. This particular order is not nearly as effective as the Teutonic Knights or some of the other similar knights orders that are supported by the Pope. The original Sword Brothers were set up by a bishop in Riga, and then they later get papal approval. They're a lot more aggressive than some of these other orders. They're a little more reckless. This is a period when of what's called the Northern Crusade, where you have some of these Catholic forces like the Teutonics and Sword Brothers pushing further and further east and south into pagan lands, Lithuania being a prime target of this, and even early on Livonia itself, and they're trying to spread Catholicism. Well, once they start pushing up against some of the Orthodox lands like Russia, they decide, well, we've taken care of the pagan problem, let's bring the Orthodox back into the Catholic fold. So they actually start crusading against the Orthodox. And the Livonian order, unfortunately, does not do too well. They get a little too ambitious, they get a little too reckless, and they basically get close to wiped out. They petition the Pope to help them recover, to rebuild. The Pope says, no, you guys kind of deserve that. And I'm paraphrasing slightly here. I'm not going to help you rebuild. What I will do is allow you to swear an oath as a Teutonic Knight, and your order will become part of the Teutonic Order. You will still be semi-autonomous. You will still be able to make some of your own decisions and so on and so forth. You just have to run it past the head of the Teutonic Knights before you act on it. They will be kind of reining you in. So the Livonian Order becomes a part of the Teutonic Knights, but they are semi-autonomous. They're located further east in Livonia as opposed to over in the land controlled by the Teutonic Knights, and they can pretty much make their own decisions. They just have to run them past the head of the Teutonics before they can act on them. And it is the Livonian Order that participates in the Battle of Lake Peipus, the battle on the ice. It's not the main host of the Teutonic Knights. Now, the Livonian Order couldn't have done this without the permission of the main order, but we kind of need to keep in mind that what we're really talking about is the Livonian Order, a subset of the Teutonic Knights that are very different in character. They're more aggressive, they're more reckless. They're definitely not the same as the main body of the Teutonics. They're a horse of an entirely different color. They just basically owe fealty to the Teutonics. So I just want to get that background out of the way. And again, there's only a small number of these knights, supported by, I believe, some Danish knights. A vast majority of the host that's fighting in this battle is going to be Estonian infantry.
142, the German order of Teutonic Knights had invaded northeastern Russia and occupied the old city of Pskov.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to be pausing a lot here, I think. Let's comment about the film we're seeing here, because this is actually a very interesting story. I told you I'd have some trivia for you. What we're watching is Sergei Eisenstein's Alexander Nevsky. It's a very well-known movie from a very well-known Soviet filmmaker. Sergei Eisenstein is one of the best known of all the Soviet filmmakers outside of the Soviet Union itself. His most famous film from the Western perspective would probably be Battleship Potemkin. If you've ever seen that scene of a baby carriage bouncing down steps amidst a bloody massacre, that's part of Battleship Potemkin. That scene is from Sergei Eisenstein. And that scene's been parodied or recreated in many other movies. I believe one of the Police Academy movies has it, but I've seen it dozens of times in other movies. It's iconic. He also did 2 of 3 parts of a film on the life of Ivan the Terrible. Stalin loved part 1 and was eager and encouraged Eisenstein to make a part 2 and 3. When he saw part 2, he hated it because part 1 dealt with the good years of Ivan the Terrible when he rises to power and he helps make Russia a great place. And part 2 deals with his descent into terror. And some of the messaging in it kind of resonated with Stalin. He kind of saw it as kind of a personal attack, and certainly as a defamation of the character of a great Russian hero. So part 3 never got made, and Eisenstein fell out of grace for a while because he went from being one of Stalin's favorites to on the naughty list. So there's that aspect of this film. But another aspect of this film is it was made before World War II, in the lead-up years to World War II. And when the Germans and the Soviets signed their non-aggression pact early in the escalation toward World War, right before the invasion of Poland, for example, one of the conditions that the Germans put on the Soviets was that this film was to be pulled immediately. It was to be not to be shown anymore, because it's a very negative portrayal of Germany, and there is a lot of symbolism of the National Socialists in this. And some of the portrayals of the Germans are, well, let's just say, in some cases, they're more like orcs from Mordor than they are Germans. It's not flattering in some places. But by my understanding, a lot of the costuming, especially in the case of the knights, is fairly accurate to the period. So what we're seeing here is, in terms of the costume design, is probably a pretty good reflection of what it would have really looked like. Anyway, one last thing before we continue, since we're already on Pskov, this is generally a relatively small city in northwestern Russia. It's often referred to as the little brother of Novgorod the Great, which isn't that terribly far away. At this period of time, this is just before the Mongol invasion, so we're still kind of in the Kievan Rus period, although it's already in decline. So you've got Pskov is going to be a city that controls the surrounding region, kind of a city-state, same thing with Novgorod. The two of them are in pretty good relations with each other. Novgorod regularly supports their little brother against threats because Pskov is pretty close to the border with Estonia and some of those other countries along the Baltic. Pskov will become an independent country briefly, as will Novgorod will become the Republic of Novgorod. If it's not already at this point, it will be soon after. It's right around this time that it becomes the Republic of Novgorod. So we're in a period of flux. And like I said, the Mongols are right on the doorstep at this point. Literally right on the doorstep. So let's continue. Intimidating.
Under the leadership of their Grand Master, von Bach, they threatened to enslave the...
No, that's not right. I'll be right back. I'm going to check because I'm sure it wasn't von Bach. I can't remember the name of the leader, but I'm sure it wasn't von Bach. Unless that's just a title or something. I'll be right back. I want to check on that. Yeah, I thought so. It was the Bishop Hermann Dorpat, not von Bach. I think that's what he said anyway. But it's Bishop Hermann of Dorpat. That is the leader of the Teutonic forces in this conflict.
The whole population of that area, including the capital, Novgorod. In their hour of peril, the Russian people turned for leadership to their prince, Alexander Nevsky.
Now, there is a very prominent figure in Russian history. So, Alexander Nevsky, he is a prince of Novgorod, I'm pretty sure at this period. But I won't swear to that, but I'm pretty sure he is by this time. But I think he was made prince right around this time. That's why I'm a little hesitant to say for sure. He is actually the son of the Grand Prince Vladimir, which would be a neighboring city-state, or a different city-state, I guess I should say. His father appoints him as the governor of Novgorod, and then the Novgorod people themselves choose him to be their local prince. And I think it was right around this time that happens. I'm just not sure if it happens before or after the Battle of Pskov. That's where I'm kind of hazy. By the time the Battle of the Ice, I think he is the prince. But he is an important figure in Russian history, not only for fighting the battle on the ice, but he's also the one that he can immediately turn his attention to the east to deal with the threat of the Mongols. And unlike most of the Russian principalities at this time, he is going to immediately submit to the Mongols because he understands he can't win that fight. And his people understand that they can't win that fight, so they approve of his decision. So that's one reason why Novgorod is going to grow in power during the Mongol occupation, under the Tatar yoke, as they would say, as will Moscow. Novgorod and Moscow are two great examples of cities that immediately capitulated. They agreed to work with the Mongols to pay tribute, in the case of Moscow to help collect tribute from other princes. And that's going to allow these two kingdoms, or princedoms, I guess you would say, grow in power while all the others are being suppressed in power, especially Kiev, which tries to resist and get burned to the ground, basically. That's where the Kievan Rus the period of the Kievan Rus really ends, and you see the rise of Muscovy, the land around Moscow, but also the Novgorod Republic, which is going to be a very powerful player in the north, independent of Muscovy. It will be part of the Hanseatic League. It has a political system unlike anything else you'll ever see in Russia, and someday we probably want to get into that, because the history of Novgorod and the Republic of Novgorod is actually quite interesting, but well beyond the scope of what I want to talk about here. But yeah, Alexander Nevsky, he's going to deal with the Germans on the west, he's going to deal with the Mongols on the east, and he's going to keep his city safe. And he's remembered quite fondly for that. In fact, he is even sainted.
And on April the 5th, 1242, on Lake Peipus.
Yeah, so it's the Battle of Lake Peipus is what most people in the West would think of it as. For the Russians, it was Battle of Lake Chud. The Russian name was Chud.
The Russians met the might of the German forces.
So we had, like I said, 200 to 300 heavy knights supporting about 2,000 Estonian infantrymen. The numbers are debated, but that's the most common numbers I hear. The Russian side was much larger, 6,000 to 7,000, primarily militia, with some support from cavalry. Not a lot, but some. Boyar cavalry. But what the Russians lack in experience, they do make up for in numbers. But they do have a heavy lack of experience. They are primarily militia, just peasants that are given weapons and say, here, hold these and point them at the enemy. And hopefully they impale themselves on your spear. If not, you're in trouble. I'm probably being unfair to the Russian militia, but militia against trained knights and semi-experienced infantrymen, it's not an even fight.
They weren't as well equipped or as well organized. But in their hearts was a flaming courage. A flame so fierce that it pierced the German army.
Yep.
The victory they won fills a bright page of Russian history.
Okay, one more little quibble on this and then we'll move on. This is typically portrayed as a battle on the ice, hence the name, the Battle on the Ice. And most films, most recreations will show the Teutonic Knights charging over this frozen lake and the Russians rushing out to meet them on the lake. Some versions you'll see the ice breaking beneath some of the knights as if God or nature are fighting on the side of the Russians. In reality, this battle took place in April, and typically at that time of year, the ice on Lake Peipus on Lake Chud is already breaking up, so it's highly unlikely that the battle took place in the manner that is typically portrayed. It's more likely the bulk of the fighting was along the shore of the lake. Some of it might extend it over the near shore ice. That's certainly possible. It's highly unlikely the bulk of the battle took place out on the ice, especially out further into the lake, because typically that time of year, that wouldn't have been feasible. Just a small point of order. It makes a better story, though, if they're out on the ice and God has the invading Teutonics falling through the ice. It makes a better story. And like I said, it could have gone over the ice a bit, and there might have been some of that happening. But the typical portrayal of the entire battle on the ice, highly unlikely.
1704.
Okay? Everybody here should know what that is. We just finished last week the Great Northern War, and I'm pretty sure that's where we're going with this.
Another conquering army marched across Russian land, this time under Charles XII of Sweden. And again the Russians fought for their country, led by their emperor Peter the Great.
That's a pretty good portrayal of Peter, I think.
After 5 long years of war, they defeated the Swedes in the historic Battle of Poltava.
Okay, if you watched the incredibly well done Great Northern War by Kings and General last week, my reaction to it, or just the original film, which I highly recommend. It's like 6 parts, but it's well worth watching. 2.5 hours, I think, total. If you're interested in Russian history at all, it's a great video. I highly recommend it. But yeah, one problem we have with this is they're portraying this as Swedish aggression. What they're not telling you is that Augustus II of Saxony and the King of Denmark and Peter the Great had an alliance, and they started the hostilities against the Swedes. Now, to be fair to these guys, the main goal initially anyway was, for at least for Russia, was to regain land that they had lost previously. And I think that was true of the other participants as well. Sweden had grown large, it had taken land from Poland, from Russia, from other Baltic states. When Charles XII ascended to the throne, he's only 15. So these rulers see this as a perfect opportunity to regain territory that they've lost to Sweden over the past several decades, in some cases even longer. I mean, Sweden first takes land from Russia way back in early 1600s. So they see it as an opportunity, so they strike first. They see what they hope will be a weak, young, inexperienced king who's not old enough or experienced enough to lead. Unfortunately, they dramatically underestimate Charles XII. He may be young, he may be inexperienced, but he is relentless. When he gets attacked, he doesn't let up. He fights back, and he's tenacious. Again, if you want to know more, go see those videos. They're well worth seeing. But it wasn't like Sweden had just spontaneously decided to invade Russia. Russia started this fight. Well, to be fair, I believe Denmark started the fight, but it was as part of a coalition against Sweden that included Russia. And Russia immediately jumped on and attacked, as well as did Saxony, Poland. So they're kind of getting what they sowed here. They're reaping what they sowed in this case. So it's a little misleading here. Get him, Peter!
The invading Swedish armies were crushed and forever driven out of Russia.
And again, what they don't point out is at this point, Russia is invading Sweden. Absolutely. They were already pushed, because while Charles was over taking care of Denmark and taking care of Saxony and Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, I always want to say complex. Peter is grabbing territory that they had lost to Sweden previously. Parts of Finland, some of the western lands. He takes the land that will become St. Petersburg. So Peter is pushing into Swedish territory at the time of Poltava, which here they're portraying as a Swedish invasion, when actually it's a Swedish attack against a Russian invasion.
1812.
Yes, this is when Russia participated in the War of 1812 on the side of the British against the Americans. Wait, no. This is the Napoleonic Wars. Whenever I hear the year 1812, my mind just goes right to our War of 1812. And this is a Napoleonic invasion.
Napoleon and his armies had blazed their triumphant way across Europe and were marching on Moscow.
That they were.
The conquering armies entered the city, but they entered a city in
You know, I miss the days when they didn't use CGI. They actually used hundreds and hundreds of people to make films.
Flames. Even in that day, Russian earth was scorched earth to an invader.
Yeah. So what they're talking about there is, and I'm sure most people watching this channel will probably already know this, but just in case, let's talk about it. Russia, especially in the Napoleonic War, but in other wars as well, when faced with a superior enemy, they tend to retreat in front of them, scorch the earth as they pull back, so that the invading army can't live off the land. They have to rely on supply lines. And Russia is huge. They got plenty of room to back up into. 11 time zones across amount of room to back up into. So they can keep falling back pretty much forever. While the invader supply lines are getting stretched thinner and thinner, they're getting pulled deeper and deeper into enemy territory. There's going to be civilians striking at the supply lines as the main army advances deeper into territory. The folks that are living behind there are going to harass supply lines. It becomes increasingly a logistical nightmare, especially in a case like this where the Russians, as they retreat, they're destroying everything so that the French can't take advantage of local crops or shelter or anything like that. And it happened all the way to Moscow. Napoleon, contrary to popular opinion, neither Napoleon nor Germany invade in the winter. They invade early in the campaigning season. The problem is by the time you can march your army and fight your way to Moscow, it's late in the summer already. You're talking September typically. And by that time, you're pretty far in, and you need to capture Moscow. You need to set up there. You need to have supplies available, hopefully stores in Moscow. That's kind of the plan. Napoleon figured once he takes Moscow, he can camp there, set up there. The government will capitulate, they will surrender, and Russia will be his. He can set up one of his brothers or cousins or whatever to be the new ruler. I don't know who he had slated for that, but that fits his pattern, one of his marshals. And then it's over and he can turn his attention to the next problem. Unfortunately, Russia doesn't really play that game. So you got Moscow, so what? We've still got 10 more time zones that way we can cover. We're not done yet. And yeah, Moscow gets burned. There's a lot of debate over how that fire started, whether it was the Germans, or not the Germans, the Russians, the French, or accidental, or whatever. But it doesn't matter. Moscow's burned, all the food stores and supplies that Napoleon was hoping to get there. The shelter is gone, and now it's late fall, and winter's coming, and your supply lines are stretched very thin, and you've got hostile enemies all around you. It's time to get out. Unfortunately, that goes very badly for Napoleon. We're not going to get into that here. Starting next week, on Fridays, I will be doing every Friday for the next several months. I will be doing Epic Histories series on Napoleon, from his rise to power and through his Napoleonic Wars. I believe there's going to be somewhere on the order of 30 episodes of that. So we'll be doing that weekly. We're on French Fridays, not this coming Friday, but starting the Friday after. So that's something to look forward to, and hopefully we'll talk more about this when we get to that in that series. Continuing on.
And once again, the invader was forced to start the long march on the road back out of Russia.
Yep.
1914, and another German army. This time under Kaiser Wilhelm set out to conquer Russia. This time, the Russian people under the regime of the Tsar were not only fighting German guns, but oppression and corruption in their own country. And only the ultimate collapse of Imperial Germany saved Russia from losing the Ukraine and the Crimea.
All right, point of order there. Actually, a couple of them. So they're painting this as an invasion of Russia. And yes, Germany is moving into Russia, so you could call it an invasion, sure. But this is part of World War I, and it's not like Germany just decided one day that, hey, we're just going to take over Russia. But that's kind of the feeling I get from this. Is that's kind of what they're implying. Oh, here come the Germans again. They're being their evil, nasty selves and invading poor, helpless Russia. I think that's part of the propaganda, and I think that's kind of how they're wanting to spin this. It's part of World War One. Russia pushes into German-held and Austrian-held territory. Germany and Austria push back. It does this for a little bit, but more and more Russia starts losing, and Germany starts pushing more and more into Russian territory. It gets really bad after the revolution, and the Bolsheviks try their not exactly brilliant excuse me. What I'm saying is, excuse me, I just had a really bad coughing fit. Not sure where that came from. I don't seem to have coughing fits until I start doing these videos. I think it might be because I'm not used to talking this much continuously. Because often I do 2 or 3 videos, including for my gaming channel, at a time. This will be my 3rd one today. So that's probably a big part of it. Anyway, sorry. Where was I? Yeah, this is all part of World War One. It's give and take. It's not like the Germans are deliberately just decided spontaneously to invade Russia. But that's kind of the feeling I get from this. And I think that's the feeling they want you to get from this, because they're doing everything they can to portray Russia as a victim in this video. Throughout this history, they've done everything they can to make it look like people are just invading Russia and poor little Russia is having to defend themselves. When in a couple of these cases, that's very much not the case. Certainly it's not the case in the Great Northern War. Russia was very much the aggressor. And I've noticed they've left a couple of notable invasions out, which I find interesting. They leave out the Mongol invasion, which, if we're talking about poor Russia, that's the invasion to talk about. By far the most devastating invasion Russia ever suffers. Yet it doesn't show up here. Why? Well, because it's not an invasion by Germans or from people from the West. It's an invasion from Asia, not really selling the point they wanted to make here. Also, I think they left out Poland. Poland actually not only manages to invade Russia, they capture Moscow. They install the son of the Polish king as a czar briefly during a time of troubles in the first decade of the 17th century. I don't remember exactly what year that Poland controlled Moscow, but it would have been somewhere around 1610 in that area anyway. So Poland was more successful than any of these other invasions in taking control of Russia, but they leave that out. Why is that? The Mongols do far more damage, far more destruction. They're left out. They don't really fit the story that this video is trying to tell. That's why.
Which the Germans had occupied in 1918.
And in the case of Poland, well, we're on Poland's side. We don't want to paint them as an enemy in this discussion. France is too, but everybody knows about the Napoleonic invasion. You really can't leave that one out. People will notice that omission. Not as many people know about the Polish invasion and conquest of Moscow.
Yes, for 700 years, the Russian people have had to fight to defend their land against would-be conquerors. Why? Why have all these attempts been made to conquer Russia?
Because it's there. I would say a big part of it is geographical. The bulk of Russia is wide open plains, at least the European side. It's either the wide open plains or it's wide open steppes. There's not a lot of geographic boundaries in that region. That's why Ukraine, Russia, Poland are just so, one of the reasons why they're so frequently invaded is because there's no good geographic barriers to stop invaders. Borders are kind of nebulous in this region. There's other reasons too, and they're about to get into it, so I'm not going to say too much on that yet.
Perhaps Russia itself can provide the answer.
Yep.
Here it is, 1/6 of the Earth's surface, reaching from east.
Not quite, but close enough for government work. It's a little less than 1/6, but I'm not going to quibble on that.
To west, nearly halfway around the world, and southward from the North Pole to the borders of India.
Okay, that's something I think a lot of people do not understand. Because every time people find out I've been to Russia, how did you handle cold? Was it really as cold as they say? They're almost always the first reaction I get, other than why would you go to Russia? In some cases. More people than not excited about the fact that I've been there. And those people, and even the others, after why would you do that, is it really that cold there? How did you handle the cold? So on and so forth. Russia is huge, not just east to west, but north to south. And I think this video makes a great point of that by pointing out that it goes all the way up into the Arctic Circle. You've got your permafrost tundra, you got your taiga, You've got your vast open plains over here and your steppes, and then your more rugged territory over in Siberia. But you've got a huge north-south distance as well. They cross, you've got temperate and subtropical. We're getting down here up against India. This area is very warm. They're going to be growing crops that you can only grow in warm climates down here. So that's something we need to keep in mind. Russia has a wide variety of temperate zones. Now, a bulk of it is far north, yes, but look at where we are down here, okay? We're up against India pretty much. This region right here is well into the Middle Eastern range. Over here, you're going down up against the Korean Peninsula, and you've got islands coming out here into right up against Japan. So it's not all cold, okay? Russia is very geographically diverse, although a lot of this portion is very flat, but this portion definitely not. But it's also, in terms of temperate zones and climates and so on, very diverse. It's just that a bulk of the population lives in this region over in here, which tends to be a little on the northern side. But even then, there's a lot of variation.
One country of 9 million square miles. That's our own country 3 times over.
Yep, and again, this kind of illustrates my point. If you look at this right here, this is probably fits, I want to say roughly at the same latitude as the United States. So this area is going to be comparable to southern United States. And, that's what we're talking about here.
For all of North America and 1 million square miles to boot. The sun never sets on Russia. When it is dusk on its western borders facing Europe, it is already dawn on its eastern borders facing the Pacific.
Yeah, it's 11 time zones across, I believe. I've flown across 6 of them, and believe me, it's huge. And when I realized that's only a little bit over halfway, I was just like, wow, this is big. And yeah, when the sun rises on one end, it's setting on the other. Unless, of course, you're like me. When I was in Petersburg, I was there in the week leading into White Nights. That's the period when the sun never fully sets, so you always have twilight all night. When we were there, it wasn't quite to the White Nights yet, but it was close enough that it was surprisingly bright outside even at night. At 3 o'clock in the morning, it looked like 7 or 8 in the evening in the summer. Well, more like 8 or 9, but you get what I'm talking about. It was a very bright twilight all through the night. It was really, really amazing.
That's Russia. Or, to be correct, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
They've really been kind of avoiding that. Because this isn't Russia. This is Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, and Belarus, and several other countries as well.
Deep in its mountains lie thick, rich veins of gold and silver. Below ground lie enormous deposits of copper, tin, manganese, and nickel.
Yep.
Chromium and radium.
That was good. I only know nickel because I visited Krasnoyarsk, which got started as a nickel mining region.
Sulfur and magnesium. Russia is rich in raw materials. Her forests cover millions upon millions of acres. 1/4 of all the lumber reserve in the world belongs to Russia. And as for fuel, there's coal, ton upon ton. And more important, there's also oil. 213 million barrels a year of it. Black gold, flowing from the earth that contains 55% of the world's oil.
No, that is not correct. Russia has never, as far as I know, no one has ever claimed Russia had that much of the world's oil. Now, to be fair, I'm not sure if they're talking about oil in terms of production or if they're talking about reserves. But in either case, that's not accurate. Well, let me take that back. Let's start from the beginning. So, from around the turn of the century, around 1900, up until the Russian Revolution, which would be 1917, Russia was the world's leading producer of oil, for most of that period anyway. And I believe they were producing somewhere around half the world's oil. So if that's what they're talking about, that 55% number might be accurate if we're talking about that limited window of time from around the 1900 up to around 1917. By World War II, not even close. By World War II, when you had the revolution, then you had your civil wars. That did a lot of damage to the infrastructure. It caused chaos and destruction all through the country. Most production of all materials declined dramatically during that period, well into the 20s. So Russia goes through a steep decline in production. And by the time of 1930s and even 1940, they're producing maybe 8% of the world's oil. They were second to the United States at the beginning of World War II. I know that. But it wasn't anywhere near 55%. It couldn't be if they were number 2. And during the war, again, their production dropped dramatically once the Germans invade, because the Germans make a beeline straight for the oil fields. So, yeah. That's not accurate, I guarantee it. In terms of oil reserves, Russia, I don't think the percentage of oil reserves attributed to Russia has ever been higher than 15% globally. It certainly wasn't anywhere near. It's never been estimated at near 55%. United States, the Middle East, that we've always known they had larger reserves. But don't get me wrong, Russia, or the Soviet Union, I should say, a lot, but there are several countries that have more then and now. But production-wise, yeah, 1900 to 1917, they were the kings.
What else? Iron? Russia has better than 10 billion tons. That can make a lot of steel before it's done.
No idea on iron.
Yes, Russia is rich. Her farms cover millions upon millions of acres. The rich black earth that, besides giving forth oil and coal, will also grow everything from sunflowers to lotus.
Yeah, but the Black Earth is primarily in Belarus, Ukraine especially, some parts of Russia, but a bulk of the Black Earth is Ukraine. So again, they're kind of conflating Russia with the Soviet Union here.
The tea her people drink in such huge quantities, and the tobacco that they smoke.
Southern crop.
Cotton grows here too.
Southern crop.
3,800,000 bales a year. And sugar.
Very southern crop.
Land.
Yeah, you don't grow tobacco in northern climes very much. You can, but it doesn't do as well. Same with tea, for that matter. Certainly don't grow cotton in northern climes typically. You need warmer climates for that. And sugar especially. Sugar is grown in the very southernmost region of the United States, the Caribbean, Brazil. You don't see them growing sugar up in, well, sugar cane, I guess I should specify, up in the northern climate, the temperate climate. It's very definitely a warm up. Now, if we're talking about sugar beet, which I'm not really sure whether Russia would have been doing that at the time or not. That's actually a good question. I never really considered that. But sugar cane, no. That's definitely southern. Cotton, definitely southern. Even tobacco, largely southern, although it can go further north than the other two.
The animals grow fat for...
And that goes back to my point that Russia isn't all cold. It does have warm climates as well.
And wool for clothing. While on the warm plains, the fields of grain stretch as far as the eye can reach. Corn, oats, hops, rye.
Yep.
And don't forget wheat. 1/3 of the world's best.
No. I'm not sure if they're talking about wheat or grain in general. Either way, Russia, Soviet Union, did not produce 1/3 of the world's grain at this time, or ever, as far as I know. Like European grain, absolutely, I think I could probably say that. But world, no, not even a chance. I would say it's more likely. I've mentioned this in other videos, but my main area of interest in history tends to be natural disasters and things like famines, and to a lesser degree, mass migrations and that kind of thing. So I have spent a lot of time looking at famines in history, especially Russia. One of the things that attracted me to studying Russia is that it has had some catastrophic famines, and that's one of my areas of interest. My real attraction to Russia is something else altogether, but historically speaking, a lot of it has to do with famine and natural disaster. And so I've looked at a lot of the numbers in various periods of Russian history. So if we're getting into World War II, you got to remember they've had some severe famines in the wake of the civil wars, in the early 20s especially, but even more later. And we'll have some, like the Holodomor, for example, would be another one that everybody knows about, or most people know about. But at this period of time, I would be shocked if they were producing more than, say, 6 to 8% of the world's grain, and maybe up to 10 to 15% of the world's wheat. Hold on a minute. I've got some documents on some of this. Or I've got access to documents because I've done some papers on this. Let me see if I can find some better figures. I wasn't looking at percentage of the world yield, but I think at least one of those papers mentioned that. So I'll see if I can find it real quick. I'll be right back. So yeah. What I said is fairly close. Estimates are just that, estimates, especially during the war period. All bets are off because record keeping is a little more difficult to do with Germans rampaging all over your countryside. But if we're talking, for example, 1940, what we're looking at is somewhere between 10 and 15% of the world's wheat was being produced in the Soviet Union, and somewhere around 8-ish, 9-ish% grain in general, compared to grain in general around the world, or compared to wheat around the world, respectively. Nowhere near a third in either case. Again, I could see an argument being made that they produce a third of Europe's grain or wheat. Absolutely, I could believe that. I don't know if it's true or not, but I could believe that. But worldwide comparison, it looks like it's more like 8 to 9% of grain overall compared to grain overall outside the Soviet Union, or somewhere between 10 and 15% if you're going with just wheat specifically in the Soviet Union compared to outside the Soviet Union.
Yes, Russia is very rich, for it has not only raw materials and the products of its soil. Russia is also people. 193 million people.
I said earlier that the main thing that drew me to Russian history was things like famine, natural disasters, and that is true. But the thing that got me interested in Russia in general was the music. I love Russian music. I always have all my life. And Russian dance, for that matter, traditional dance. I'm not as impressed by ballet, Russian or otherwise, but the traditional dance and also the traditional costumes. But the music is what really, really got me first interested in Russia. I love just about all classic Russian folk songs, and even some of the modern Russian stuff, but especially the folk music. It's always appealed to me. So if you see me bopping along to some of the Russian music, that's why.
People of every race, color, and creed. People coming from the many different republics that comprise the Soviet Union. People speaking more than 100 different languages. But all citizens of one country.
Again, they're saying Russia, but they're really talking about the Soviet Union, although Russia itself, just by itself, has an immense amount of diversity. And that's something I really think people don't appreciate enough. There is this classic image that we have, a stereotypical Russian. And that stereotypical Russian is very European. They have certain characteristics. I don't think I need to spell those out. Here in the United States culture, they tend to be villains. The reality is it's a very diverse country with a multitude of ethnicities, a multitude of religions. It's about as varied as any country can get. And it's not from immigrants, it's from indigenous peoples. You've got your Slavs, and not just Slavs, but various different types of Slavs. You're going to have your Bashkiri, which is a Muslim group that lives over, I believe, somewhere around the Urals. I'm not sure exactly where Bashkiri is, but it's somewhere in that region, I think. You got the Cossacks, and various different groups of Cossacks for that matter. The Don Cossacks, they tend to be associated with the major rivers flowing down into the steppes. You've got the Chechens and the Georgians and groups like that down in the mountains down in the south. You have Laplanders up in the northwest. You've got the native Siberian peoples. You've got the remnants of the Mongols that remain behind. And you got all these languages, all these different cultures, all these different ethnicities all blended together, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. For that matter, you're going to have, depending on the time period especially, you're going to have significant areas with significant Jewish populations, whether it be the Paleolithic settlement or in one period of time, or, the Jewish population tended to be concentrated in one area at one point and then spread out as well at other points. You have one area dedicated to Germans, the Volga Deutsch. They're under Catherine. So very multi-ethnic, very diverse. Far more so than I think a lot of people really understand. And it shows when you look at their culture, when you look at their music and their traditions, you can kind of see some of this blending. It's really quite fascinating.
Whether they are the great Russians, the descendants of the first settlers of this vast area, and for 1,000 years its main population, or Cossacks, or famous horsemen from the open plains of the Don River Valley.
Yeah, and the Cossacks are a little interesting case because when we're talking about the Cossacks, they're very diverse as well because there were periods in Russian history, especially during times of crisis, like famine, the 1601 to 1603 famine being a perfect example of this, when the ranks of the Cossacks swelled with refugees from the Kievan Rus, peasants that are fleeing to places where they can get food. In some cases, you have even some of the lesser nobility fleeing south to escape destitution or political problems, and so on and so forth. So the Cossacks are made up, and a lot of criminals that's trying to flee justice end up among the Cossacks. So even though there are these bands of Cossacks there, they are taking in a lot of refugees, a lot of criminals that are fleeing justice, things like that as well. So they become a very mixed, diverse group over time.
From the Southwest, the Ukraine.
Yep. I need to get my balalaika out and play it some more. It's been a while since I've really gotten out and had some fun with it. Yes, I do play. I'm by no means great, but I can at least do passably on several Russian folk songs and a few American folk songs as well. I just love the balalaika. I wish I could do that, but I think I'd drop dead trying.
Here in the breadbasket of the Soviet Union live the Little Russians, better
Ukrainians.
known as Ukrainians.
Yep.
And beside them, the Moldavians and Bessarabians. Or if they come from the far south, between the Caspian and Black Seas.
Yeah, see, if you were to show this video to somebody and say, what country do you think we're in? Nobody's going to say the Soviet Union or Russia, because this area has been in both at various points in its history. These are either Soviet citizens or Russian citizens, depending on the time period you're talking about. And in some cases, citizens of other countries as well. But you wouldn't think of this as either Soviet Union or Russia, yet it is.
Where we find the Armenians and the Georgians, the Ingush, the Cherkess, rugged as the high peaks of their native Caucasian mountains.
I would like to visit the Caucasus someday. I hear they're gorgeous and they have a lot of untamed wilderness up there. And I'm born and raised in Colorado, so mountains will always be my home, even if I'm living somewhere else, which I may be someday, who knows. I'll always be a mountain boy at heart.
Whether they are Uzbeks, Turkmen, Kyrgyz, from the Persian and Indian frontiers, or Mongols.
I was going to say, that's Mongol. I recognize that sound. That's impressive.
The Bashkirs, Turco-Tartars, the Buryats, the Yakuts, from far beyond the Ural Mountains, or the people of the ice country, hunters like the Zambs, or settlers like the Laplanders, whether they come from the pioneering wilderness of the far north, or from a great city like their capital, Moscow, where the ancient buildings of an ancient civilization stand beside the modern structures of a modern civilization, where the old Russian droshka still competes with the modern limousine.
That actually hasn't changed in some parts of Russia. I remember one day I was out walking in one of my trips yeah, I would see people riding horses or carriages alongside trolleys, alongside buses, alongside modern cars. It was very, very weird from my perspective. It just seemed like there were so many different ages all kind of mixed together. And I liked it, don't get me wrong, but it was kind of a weird, disjointed feeling walking out there and seeing all this mingled.
Whether they work in factories or as soldiers, whether they are bricklayers or traffic cops, sailors or riveters, school children or farmers, nurses or engineers, window washers or sales girls, housewives or postal clerks, radio announcers or stewardesses, scientists or typists, musicians or ballerinas. Regardless of what they do or where they live, they all have one thing in common: love of their soil.
You can definitely see the propaganda aspect of this. What really, really makes me smile and kind of laugh at this is that this is the U.S. Department of Defense producing this video trying to sell the Soviet Union. It just, as a child of the Cold War, it just blows my mind. I love it, but it's hard to take it serious because it's very definitely 100% propaganda, trying to sell a message that I guarantee the people making this didn't really buy into. But I like what they're doing, and I see what they're doing. I mean, right here, they're trying to humanize these people to show them as normal, everyday citizens, as friendly, as neighborly, as victims, not as an enemy in any way, shape, or form, even though we've already had a Red Scare in the United States by this point. We already had this fear of communism. We already viewed the Soviet Union as a threat, but we need to play nice here. We're at war, and they're on our side. So we got to humanize them. Just as in the first Red Scare, we're demonizing them. Now we got to pull that back and sell them as sympathetic humans that we need to support and help because they're in trouble and they're depending on us. And to some degree, we're depending on them.
That is Russia.
That's not Russia, though. That's the Soviet Union. They're really trying hard not to say that, though.
Size, the largest country in the world. Raw materials, unlimited. Manpower, 193 million. These are the three reasons why every conqueror in history has wanted Russia. And these are the reasons why the modern would-be conqueror wrote,
"When we speak of new territory, we must think of Russia. Destiny itself points the way there."
Okay, we're going to call it quits here because we're now starting to get into the actual World War II and the battles. If you guys want me to continue with this, I'd be happy to do like a weekly episode or so of this or any of the others in this series, the Battle of Britain or the Battle of China, for example. I personally would be very interested in seeing the Battle for China. I had never seen it, but my grandfather served in the CIB theater of the war, the China, India, Burma theater, which just never gets talked about in most takes on World War II. We're either talking about the Western Front or the Pacific or occasionally the Eastern Front, when we're talking about things like Stalingrad or Leningrad. But at least here in the United States, the focus is never on China, India, Burma. I didn't even know there really was fighting over there until I got into college. I mean, I did because of my grandfather's nonstop stories about India during the war. And I've got dozens of pictures that he brought back from the CIB theater. And if you guys would be interested in seeing those, I'd be more than happy to post a slideshow or something if anybody's interested in seeing some photographs of China, India, and Burma during World War II. My grandfather's perspective, he was a professional photographer. I've mentioned this in multiple videos now. And he had been working in a newsroom before the war. And he went right back to it after, and he took plenty of pictures during the war. And I've got quite a few of them, so I'd be happy to share them if you want to see them. And again, I'd be happy to look at some of these other videos or the rest of this one. If you guys are interested, I'd be more than happy to make it a semi-regular let's stop by and see what's going on and why we fight. So I hope I was able to add a lot to this. Personally, I had fun with it because I like tearing apart propaganda like this. I know I missed a lot. And they're throwing a lot of figures that I'm not confident in commenting on, but I suspect are also probably exaggerated. But I definitely caught the oil one. And I checked, by the way, when I looked at the grain, I did check the oil as well. And the numbers that I threw out seemed to be more consistent with the data I was able to find at a relatively quick glance. I spent about 30 minutes digging on that as well. Didn't find a lot, but what I did find, some intelligence reports and some military reports, suggests that my numbers were much closer than what these guys threw out. The Soviet Union was not producing 55% of the world's oil, nor did they have anywhere near 55% of the oil reserve. At one point, they had been producing around 55%, but that was much earlier than this period. 1910 to the 1900s up to the revolution. So very misleading there. And the grains were also very misleading. I was very sure that was wrong, but we did check and yeah, it was wrong. I'm sure some of the other numbers they tossed out are wrong too. But I think the overall portrayal of the diversity was well done, other than they keep trying to portray it all as Russia, when it's actually a lot of those groups were part of the Soviet Union and not necessarily ever part of the Russian Empire, although some of them were. So you gotta be a little careful there. Anyway, I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Please let me know in a comment if you saw anything I missed or caught anything that I missed or wanted to expand on any of it. Also, let me know if you'd like to see more of this video or this series, and if so, what you would like me to look at. And also, if you'd like to see some pictures of China, India, Burma during World War II, I'd be happy to post those too in like a slideshow type format. So with that said, I will see you all next time. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.